One family that is guilty of profiting from enslavement is the royal family. In 1564, Queen Elizabeth I gave a large royal ship to the enslaver John Hawkins in exchange for a share of profits in the voyage. The enslaved people were traded for goods, including ginger and sugar. Continuing with his ancestors' atrocities, in 1660, the Royal African Company was established by the Duke of York, who later became James II. Many of the enslaved Africans kidnapped by the Royal African Company were branded with the initials DY, which stood for the Duke of York. King Charles II later became the head of the Royal African Company and continued to kidnap and enslave African people and transport them to North, Central, and South America. In 1689, Edward Colston, the deputy governor of the Royal African Company, transferred £1,000 worth of shares in the company to William III. Between 1672 and 1731, the Royal African Company kidnapped approximately 187,000 African people, more than any other single organization in history. We may never know exactly how much the royal family made from enslavement. The monarchy has a combined net worth of approximately £72 billion. King Charles has a personal fortune of approximately £1.8 billion, and as we know, he did not pay any inheritance tax on the Queen's private estate, which was worth more than £641 million. These figures are an estimate as the Queen lobbied the government to implement laws which would hide her wealth from the public. Dr. Brooke Newman, who is a historian at Virginia Commonwealth University and currently writing a book entitled The Queen's Silence, which details the monarchy's involvement in slavery and its failure to acknowledge it. She says, and I quote, "There is no doubt that the centuries of investment in African slavery and the slave trade contributed highly to building the status, prestige, and fortune of today's royal family. The profits funded the expansion of the empire, which generated further wealth for Britain and its royal families." As a black man, seeing individuals, institutions, and the media celebrate the Queen's Jubilee, mourn her death, and commemorate the King's coronation, whilst at the same time omitting the issue of how this family accumulated such capital and authority, left me feeling angry and isolated. It also left me feeling that the history of exploitation enforced on my ancestors must be told, and this institute of royalty must be torn down. The establishment of the monarchy is racist, and forever will be a quintessential example of social hierarchy, oppression, and colonization. People mourning the Queen and celebrating the King must either be unaware, indifferent, or endorse the evils of class warfare, rape, theft, enslavement, or the structures that the monarchy represents. So, what can the royal family do to atone for enslavement? Reparations. So this is a word that many seem to be very afraid of, but reparations is not novel or untested. In fact, it has been implemented by many countries, including the UK. The United States paid approximately $1.6 billion to the Japanese victims of internment. Germany paid approximately $80 billion to the survivors of the Holocaust. The Nazis were not the only ones who operated concentration camps. Britain also used them in Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising during the 1950s. It's important to note that the Queen Elizabeth, was on the throne at this time. In Kenya, the camps were sites used for random executions, and interrogations involved stuffing detainees' mouths with mud and stomping on their throats until they passed out. 90,000 Kenyans were executed, tortured, or maimed, and 160,000 people were detained in appalling conditions. In 2013, it was announced that 5,228 Kenyans who were tortured would receive payouts from the British government totaling £20 million. Earlier this year, the Guardian newspaper were informed that they were founded due to their links to enslavement. The owner, Scott Trust, issued an apology and announced a decade-long program of restorative justice, which would include allocating over £10 million to descendant communities who were affected by the Guardian's 19th century founders. This will benefit locations in Jamaica, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Additionally, The Guardian will expand its reporting of Black communities in the UK, US, the Caribbean, South America, and Africa, and create 12 new Guardian journalism roles to better serve Black audiences. In February, the Trevelyan's, an aristocratic British family, publicly apologized for their ancestors owning more than 1,000 enslaved Africans. They also created a £100,000 fund to be used as a form of reparations for the people of Grenada. It goes without saying that no monetary figure could ever adequately repay the victims that I've just spoken about for their economic losses, let alone compensate for their pain and suffering. However, it is a necessary step to address the horrors of the past that are still resonating in the present. It's also important to remember that enslaved Black people never received compensation for the hundreds of years of violence inflicted on them. Neither have their ancestors who have had to navigate through institutional and structural racism. However, the enslavers did for the loss of their property. When slavery was abolished in 1833, they received £20 million, which is the equivalent of $3 billion today. And that compensation was not completely paid off until 2015, meaning if you worked and paid tax before 2015, you indirectly paid the enslavers' compensation. It's important to remember that reparations is not just about a monetary payment. From the royal family, government, and every institution and individual who has inherited generational wealth and power from enslavement, we should demand the following. 1, a formal apology. The words profound sorrow, often used by Prince William and King Charles, will no longer cut it. 2, returning all artifacts, artwork, human remains, and every other item that was stolen from countries colonized by Britain. 3, addressing the institutional and systemic structures which reinforce racism. For example, Black women being 5 times more likely to die in childbirth compared to white women. Black girls being 3 times more likely to be strip searched by the Met Police compared to their white counterparts. And Black boys being 6 times more likely to be excluded from school compared to their white peers. 4, cancelling all debt and interests owned by previously occupied nations. 5, investing in the infrastructure of countries previously colonized by the UK. That means, but it's not limited to, houses, hospitals, mental health provisions, schools, universities, training programs, apprenticeships, roads, libraries, and a decent welfare system. 6, the 151 million people in the 15 Commonwealth countries should be allowed to have a referendum in order to vote whether to keep or remove King Charles as head of state. And finally, the complete abolishment of the royal family. We can no longer go on celebrating and paying for an institution that amassed excessive amounts of wealth and power from the kidnap, enslavement, rape, abuse, and murder of Black people. I'm going to end with a quote from the American journalist and political commentator Chris Hedges. Monarchy obscures the crimes of empire and wraps them in nostalgia. It exalts white supremacy and racial hierarchy. It often consigns to death those considered lesser breeds, most of whom are people of color. Thank you.